instruments of your peace, that where there is hatred, we may sow love, where there is injury, pardon, and where there is despair, hope. Grant, O divine Master, that we may seek to console, to understand, and to love in your name. For you live and reign with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Do any of you all know this prayer is kind of a famous prayer? Does anyone know the author?
St. Francis.
Yes, St. Francis of Assisi. It's worded a little bit differently, but that goes back to that translation dilemma, doesn't it? So we'll begin with Genesis 45, 3 to 11, and then it ends on verse 15. So again, I'm going to encourage all of you to let me put some pens and pencils out. If you want to take any notes or highlight anything that you're curious about, I invite you to do that. I think I'm going to read Genesis today, and I'll ask for someone then to read Luke. But I think I'll take a go at reading the first lesson today. And again, the context is Joseph, the son of Jacob, who has been exiled, sold into slavery, and has been living in Egypt. He had many brothers, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but they sold him into slavery, and he became well known and he had a high role under Pharaoh, almost with as much authority as Pharaoh in Egypt. So that's the context. And then his brothers, they get sent to Egypt. They get captured and exiled. And so, okay, here we go. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep you alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry up and go to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, and so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty.' Then he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and after that his brothers talked with him." Okay. So what do you all know about Joseph?
He had a coat.
He had a coat, which, ironically, I found out has been mistranslated. Now, thanks to Andrew Lloyd Webber, and it didn't affect the musical, but it was actually a robe with long sleeves is the proper way from the Hebrew to translate that. It was not a multicolor coat, but a robe with long sleeves.
Oh, no.
I know, that wouldn't make much of a musical, would it? I know.
It was many colored.
translations ruin everything, don't they? So, but, so Jacob, we know of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We know that terminology. Jacob had many sons, and his most favored one was Joseph. And, you know, another interesting factoid I found out, Joseph's story from birth to being thrown in a pit by his brothers, to being sold into slavery, to this part of Genesis, Joseph's narrative takes up 1/3 of Genesis.
So he also went to prison, didn't he?
In Egypt, I believe.
Before
Egypt.
He became Pharaoh's guide or whatever.
Yes, he was imprisoned. So he now, at this point in the story, he's become a dream interpreter for Pharaoh, and he's now ruling over all of Egypt. So he has a lot of power, and he is finding the hand of God at work in his life. He went, though, from being an arrogant young man who would have a dream and would tell his father and brothers that he would see something that represented them bowing down to him, and that angered them. And so he went from being an arrogant young man to a humble leader, and that's kind of at the heart of this story. So we'll get into all that. But now Joseph is a wise, older man, and he's able to not only help, but forgive his brothers immediately, and not hold what they did to him against him. They had planned to kill him. If you'll read in Genesis, again, he had angered his family because he had dreams that he claimed showed that they would bow down to him at some point. This upset them. They went off, the brothers went off to tend some land, and Jacob asked Joseph to go and kind of check in on them. And they saw him coming from afar, and they planned to kill him. And I believe it was Reuben, one of the brothers, kind of talked them into not killing him, but to sparing his life. So they ended up digging a pit and throwing him in this pit, thinking, well, maybe he'll make it out, maybe he won't, but we won't have to deal with him anymore. And then they saw, I believe, some Midianites coming along, and they thought, well, we could leave him in this pit, or we could sell him into slavery and make money off of him. And either way, we'll be done with him. So they sold him as a slave, and he was taken to Egypt. They put some blood on part of his clothing, and then took that clothing back to Jacob and said, look what we found. Is this your son's clothing? And he said, yes, this is I believe it was the coat, the robe that Jacob had given him. And he said, oh, he must have been devoured by a wild animal. And Jacob then mourned, what he thought was the death of his son. So that takes us kind of to the present, where a famine was in the land, and his brothers are also in Egypt, enslaved, and they can't even believe that Joseph not only is alive, but is in a position of authority to help them. And again, to get to the heart of it, this is a message about reconciliation and mercy and forgiveness, and it'll tie into the gospel. But what stands out to you at this point? Now that I've kind of given it some context, what do you know about Joseph? What stands out to you about this part of his story?
The forgiveness.
Okay.
The forgiveness.
Okay.
Yeah, because in his status at that point, he could have been very revengeful,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had every right to to say, you know, well, I guess you'll die in Egypt like you intended me to,
Yeah.
but he didn't.
He doesn't blame his brothers.
He didn't even blame them.
But if this story is really a true story, that's really extraordinary how a person born under the sin would have this kind of heart. This is almost like Jesus himself. How is it that it was possible to be like this? That's just not possible. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think certainly it's possible. We saw in the book of Daniel, in exile was also given a high role of the household. Was again kind of used as a dream interpreter. So I don't want to say it's not possible, but I do want to focus on something that you're alluding to, Margaret, that this text deals with the idea of theodicy. Theodicy is that concept of how God and evil can share the same space, or why God allows evil to exist at all. So that's theodicy. And what you're kind of asking is, why would God allow Joseph to almost be killed, sold into slavery, imprisoned, given a hard life, given dealt a very difficult hand in life? If yes, it may have turned out okay for him, but why did he have to go through all that? And we see that again and again in the Bible.
Yeah, this is the, and it's very confusing also. He says, he told his brother, don't worry, don't be distressed or angry with yourself, because God has sent me.
Yeah.
This is it's very confusing. It doesn't justify what they did to his brother. And you know, we have a lot of prophecy, like Jesus, they killed him, but it was God's will. Also, when the last day comes, the rumors are that the nation would go right, and the father would go against, all these things. It does not mean that can be justified. It's almost like it's God's will. It wasn't, it was God's will, and we were supposed to act like this. And it kind of confuses, that there is a right and a wrong. Of course, it's really admirable that he has this kind of heart. And yet, today, what's right and what's wrong? God wills the wrong thing in order to make a good thing, It does not give us a standard that's clear. And so we have, okay, did I do wrong or right? Or it was God's will or my will? You have some kind of a...
So let me ask a question, or kind of make a statement that'll lead us kind of into a deeper discussion that I wanted to have on this very topic. Often when people get cancer, no one blames God for that. Some people do, but in general, we just accept that this is part of being human, that we may get illness, we may get diseases, we may even succumb to them. But the moment that someone gets a remission, or a re-diagnosis, or they're free of that cancer, they then thank God for that. So, just hear me out. Follow my line of thinking, if you will. We don't blame God for the cancer, but we thank God for the removal of it. Does that make sense? And that's human to do that. So, do we believe that God's hand is involved in everything?
But it wasn't God who caused the cancer. It means it wasn't him that removed it. Could it be? You know what I'm saying? You say,
Well, there are many ways to look at that. We live in a flawed world, We live in a world that is finite and full of disease and climate change and violence and nuclear weapons and hatred and evil intentions. We could look at it as God did not make this world to be, God's original plan was for it to be perfect, but it's not perfect. So we have to deal with the consequences of human action, right? So, but then it seems curious to acknowledge that God can cure cancer, but not stop it from happening in the first place. And how I'm tying that in is God could have allowed his brothers, Joseph's brothers, to not cause that violence to him and sell him into slavery, only to then someday teach them a lesson and keep them alive. It seemed like there could be an easier way to it, but Joseph is seeing the hand of God at work in all of it. He, again, like you said, he said, "For God sent me before you to preserve life." God sent me here. You didn't do that. God ultimately had a hand in it. Rick?
Yeah, I think when things like this story, when Joseph was sold into slavery, I'm sure he did not understand why. And the same is true for us. When somebody does something to us that hurts us, or when a door closes, at that point, that time, that moment, we don't understand. It's only with the passage of time that we look back and say, I see why that happened. I see what the hand of God. And we see that only because the Spirit is working in us and opens our eyes. I remember when I found out that my part in the campus ministry at Ohio State was being shut down, I was crushed. But as I look back at it, I see it opened a door to something else that was very fruitful, and I think it was something that the hand of God was at work. Paul had a beautiful way of saying that. In all things, God works for good for those who love him. But we see that only by faith. You know, Paul had been pushed into a corner. Well, why do you say that? He would have said, because I trust God. And I think that's what Joseph is saying here in verse 8. I look back, at my life, and I can now say, you didn't do this. God did it for your good.
So I like the phrase, the mystery of God's love in all things.
Right.
That's not a well-known phrase, but it was in a commentary that I read. The mystery of God's love in all things. Because to believe in God, I think, is to accept mystery. Rachel?
Well, when he said he was sent to preserve a remnant on earth, so the brothers were all given this land in order to preserve the future. Am I right on that?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. So that's what this really was about. All that Joseph was going through was that this family then could be given this land and preserve the future of the Israel.
So how does this story compare to the parable of the prodigal son?
People coming back to God.
We have Joseph acting as the father, maybe in that parable. The brothers, unlike the youngest son, they're not coming back begging to be forgiven, but Joseph with open arms is saying, you don't need to feel bad about what you've done. I forgive you. God had a purpose, and all is well. All is okay. I've been sent here to preserve life, and there was a deeper divine purpose, and even in the evil that you did to me. Now the text doesn't say that exactly, but that's the intent of it. And so for Joseph, the evil that his brothers intended for him was almost re-intended, I think, by God to purify him, to humble Joseph, and to bring him to Egypt to save many people. And he saw the hand of God in all of that. He saw something evil that happened, and it's not that he didn't view it as evil, but he saw God using it for good, for his good and for the good of all the people that he would be able to help in a time of severe famine.
The reason why, remember, the reason why they spent 400 years in Egypt is because Abraham didn't do the offering right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph was sent to stop 400 years. During these 400 years, God multiplied it in 2 million or something like that. So here it says, to preserve the life. To preserve the life is not just his 12 brothers, but all the descendants to be able to ready to go to the promised land and build the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So Joseph, it's an incredible, same as Jesus, somewhat you see that in him.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus had to go through the way Joseph did. Jesus go through the way Moses went through, like a precursor.
Mm-hmm.
So Joseph is more like Jesus.
Mm-hmm. In many ways.
That's why he had this kind of feeling, like it.
Joseph does become kind of a Jesus-like character in that his life was not going to become a sacrifice, although the path he took was kind of a sacrificial path in order to provide food and life to many. Yeah.
What did Margaret say about Abraham in the very beginning? She said
Abraham, the people originally were exiled to Egypt because of something that Abraham did. I don't know all the specifics of that, but it was something dealing with an offering.
Abraham was supposed to make an offering, 3 animals, big and the smaller, and the smallest was the bird. And he didn't cut it into half, remember?
Oh, yeah, okay.
And when he didn't cut the bird half, and he made the offering, and suddenly the Bible said the dark cloud came, and your descendants will be cursed, and So it's because of that split of cutting into half, that was the biggest failure. And that's why he had to have his mission down to Isaac. Isaac became Abraham. And because of Isaac took Abraham's position, his 2 sons, Jacob and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, they are the ones that are supposed to fight each other and unite. So that's why this thing about God says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So 3 generations together. That's why they have this. Jacob became Israel, the success.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting that Joseph is that way, it's like Jesus.
I thought they went into Egypt because of the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians took over, and that's when they went into Egypt for exile.
That was at a different time, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
that was later than this.
Yeah. Yeah, later than the book of Genesis.
Right, so that's why I was a little confused.
Yeah, well, it is confusing. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, there are a lot of details to keep up with.
Well, so did they go into exile more than one time?
Well, yes, we're either sold into slavery or ended up in Egypt multiple times. The Babylonian exile may have been a singular event, but I'd have to check on that.
Well, so it's after this that Moses came along.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
That's 400 years later.
So
We need a timeline.
we do.
We need a timeline that goes up here that shows where all of these
Well,
things.
and I bet in the Lutheran Study Bible.
I looked in the back of my Bible to see if there was something in it, and there was none.
Well, the context that follows after this, the writer, the Genesis writer says, this Pharaoh died, and another Pharaoh took over in Egypt who didn't know Joseph and didn't like him. And that's when the people of Israel began to be enslaved, and with all the brickmaking and all that stuff. And that's when Moses comes along to lead them out of slavery and into the promised land. So there's a whole, it would help if we had
We need a timeline going
a
right
map on the wall, but that's the context.
I will work on that for you all.
After this story.
I will.
That's how the Israelites get to Egypt. Then another Pharaoh arises who doesn't know them and doesn't like them, and he makes some slaves out of them. And along comes Moses, and then so forth. And then Babylonian captivity comes after they're in the promised land, but they start to disobey God.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I wasn't feeling well, and I spent a lot of time watching TV. And I turned on TBN at some point in the afternoon, and I turned on the end of this guy talking about end times. And he did offer a timeline. You could order one for $35. But it starts from the beginning clear down to the very end, and from what I got out of it, and I said this to Bill, if we go to war with Russia, this could be the beginning of that tribulation period that he was talking about, where the Antichrist comes.
I
And
would.
the Antichrist is on the earth for, now, I think this is like I think this is a thing that the Lutherans don't talk about much.
I think it's dangerous to predict the end of the world because Jesus said that no one would know.
True,
So.
true. But so this timeline is, that they've come up with, shows the Antichrist ruling for 1,000 years, and then Jesus coming and ruling for 1,000 years, or some, maybe I have my numbers all mixed up, I don't know.
You have to remember that the book of Revelation was written in a sense coded.
Yeah, kind of a.
And that, everything
Cryptic
he
coding.
referred to
And
was in the
it
book
had
of
to-
Revelation.
But it had to make sense to the people to whom John sent it. But in order to send it, it had to be cleared by Roman censors. And so he had to say what he wanted to say to build, to strengthen them in the face of serious persecution. And we can't translate one-to-one what the book, it's all coded.
When he'll talk about like a white horse or
Yeah.
a blanket or something falling from the sky, it's
Well,
coded language.
He talked about, this guy yesterday was talking about this leopard beast
Yeah.
Okay.
with 7 horns, But then there was another beast as well, something coming out of the sea would come before that leopard thing comes.
Well,
Maybe that was the Bengals Saturday.
let me pull us back a little bit, because nonetheless, I mean, I wouldn't want to know when the end of the world was going to come, and you know, I don't know, maybe it provides some people comfort, but it's not something that I would want to know.
But for
even if I- even if I
$35,
could.
you can get the answer.
Yeah. I don't think I would live 1,000 years, and I don't see how any one leader would live that long to even rule. But
But isn't it God's purpose, or his final purpose is to bring kingdom?
yes, love wins in the end.
Right, it has to
The
be.
kingdom of God will unfold, and the kingdom of God will defeat evil and
so,
sin and death.
So evil world has to end,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So the sooner it comes, the better, eh? No?
I'd like to share a quote. I'm going to kind of bring us back into Genesis, and then we'll move on to Luke in one moment. I'd like to share a quote from a late author named John Sanford. And this kind of deals with how we've been talking about kind of seeing God working even through evil, even through things that don't seem like God would have God's hand in. And he said, when the pattern of our lives becomes clear to us, even the darkness and pain can be seen to have its proper place. And I'll say that again. When the pattern of our lives becomes clear to us, even the darkness and pain can be seen to have its proper place. Theme to end on, in Genesis anyway, I don't believe that God causes evil. But I do believe that all that God can do sometimes with allowing free will is to work with what humanity does, is to work with the evil that we create. And sometimes that evil sees its natural conclusion, and death and destruction happen, violence happens, good out of that. But I also don't try to explain it too much, and neither did Martin Luther, because when you begin to explain it too much, then you try to attribute a reason for the Twin Towers being attacked. Then you try to find a reason for an earthquake leveling half of Haiti. Then you try to find a reason for a hurricane in the Philippines, or any natural disaster. And I think that's very dangerous to blame God or to find some immediate holy purpose for catastrophic events. So I think Rick kind of made a good point that most of the time God's hand and the holy work of God in the world can only be seen in hindsight. And that's kind of where I put my faith. I wait to see if I can see the hand of God after the hand of God has moved and worked. Sandy?
Well, do you believe that the devil causes some bad things to happen? For instance, you cannot compare the 911 to a tornado. I mean, natural disasters are far different than people making decisions about what to do. And when people decide to do evil things, to me, that's the devil part of the
on earth can be very helpful. I think that we just are all full of human selfish intentions, and that's sin. We are full of, and we'll get to this in just a moment with the Gospel of Luke. Our natural inclination is not to turn the other cheek and not to look out for the best of someone else. We live in very self-protective, what the hand of God did very quickly. But yes, if for a lot of people they would say the devil was the evil force behind an act of terrorism like that. My own theology, I would just say that's human sin. That's very, very misguided people believing that they are somehow obeying God by killing people who don't obey God. But whether you call it the devil or free will, it's still human sin. The devil really is not mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. The language that we know as the Satan, which is Hebrew, the Satan, the Satan is the accuser. That language did not begin to be used until the New Testament.
What about Lucifer?
I don't know that that's even an accurate translation that is found in the Bible. It's usually Ha-Satan is the Hebrew, the Satan, the accuser. So a lot of the more like the pointy-eared, red figure with a pointy tail is a lot of that comes more out of Dante's Inferno and literature than the Bible. Gehenna is a word, Sheol and Gehenna were used kind of as places of abandonment, places of death in the Old Testament. In the Hebrew Bible, words that then kind of became associated with the devil in the New Testament really meant like a dumping ground or a place of death or a place of abandonment from God. That's how they viewed hell. In the time of the Hebrew Bible, they didn't really have the concept of hell that came forth in the New Testament. It was more, they focused on death or being apart from God. And again, the words used were like Sheol and Gehenna, which don't mean the devil. They mean kind of a place of death or a place of burning. And it often would reference like big trash piles on the edge of town where things would get dumped and things would get burned up. Now, my Hebrew Bible knowledge is a bit limited, so I'm kind of pushing my limit of knowledge here, and I can find out more for you if you'd like on that.
Well, I know that in Genesis it talks about Lucifer.
That's right.
And I don't know if that's a Hebrew translation, if it's a Greek translation, if it's Latin, what it is. But they do talk about Lucifer in Genesis.
I'd have to see that translation, I guess, because I didn't know that term was used in Genesis.
I don't think it is.
It could be in a certain translation, but in the translations I've used, I haven't seen that term. I've seen the serpent spoken of.
What about in the King James Version?
It could be. I don't use the King James.
Well, I don't either, although I did at one time, that's all I had. That's years
That's all
ago.
any of us have.
Huh?
That's all any of us have. when
Right,
we
that's
were
what
young.
I'm saying.
Didn't we grew up? It was simple that God didn't create evil, but He created angel, and it turned against God, and that's what we call Satan. So God didn't. Isn't that how we? I grew up Catholic.
Lucifer was an angel that God threw out. And that Lucifer has become to think of as Satan.
Right. But that wasn't really spoken about in the Bible until the New Testament, I believe. I don't think that goes back to Genesis. That account is spoken of.
Well,
Peggy.
in Job, it talks about Satan.
Yes, the Satan, the accuser. And Job is an interesting story because it sets it in almost like a courtroom setting where you have a prosecutor, and that would be the Satan, the accuser, the Satan. But Job is kind of unique in that that's one of the only Hebrew Bible books that mentions Ha-Satan, or the Satan.
I guess I grew up on the farm, and I have a different aspect of this whole scenario.
Sure.
To me, God is in control, period.
Mhm.
And yes, we'd like to believe that he only does good things, but you know, he lets other things happen.
Mhm.
And those other things that happen isn't necessarily controlled all by him, but by a lot of other people. And so that's why you get people who don't follow the same rules that we like to think we live
Sure.
by.
Mhm.
And so that's why there are people like Lucifer and other people that show up and cause all kinds of havoc.
Well, and I think
That's
that,
the way I look at this whole scenario. It's God's in control, period.
Mhm.
And some of the stuff that happens is good, and some of it's really bad,
yeah.
and we're not in control of that. And nobody else is.
And that's
God
the,
is.
that's the belief that many, many people hold to. I'm going to pause and ask us to go on to Luke. I am happy to return to this subject later today even, and I'll do what I can to find some evidence of the things that I've said, and a timeline. We've asked for a timeline in Genesis, and I'm going to, in 2 weeks when I'm back with you, I'll try to provide that too. Can we have a volunteer to look at Luke 6:27 to 38?
Jesus said, "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge."
Oh, wuss.
Well, and we'll get to that, Rick, because I know what you're getting at. It's not a good plan from a
Right.
human point of view.
Yeah.
It's not a very sustainable plan for survival. It's not a very good plan to lend to people, even if you know that they're not going to give back what you've lent them. To love people who hate you. To if someone takes away your coat, you give them your shirt as well. To give to anyone who begs of you, and don't ask for goods again if someone takes the goods that you have. I mean, we can all we can look at do to others as you would have them do to you, the golden rule, which also is not unique to the Bible. We can look at that and we can find value in that, and I think we would all say, well, yeah, that's a good rule to live by. Do to people as you'd have them do to you. But Jesus goes way deeper than that. So Rick, say more about your thoughts on that.
Well, I actually tried this when I was in the 8th grade. There was a kid who was convinced that I liked the same girl he did.
Okay?
And he rounded up a group of his friends and cornered me after school, you know, way deeper than most of us. I mean, we deal, the next paragraph, you know, the second section there about, everything is about reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
I do for you if you'll do for me.
And expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High to give out to the world. And Jesus is also giving his disciples kind of a new lens with which to view their own situation in the world, possibly like Joseph in Genesis. They've been given a new lens with which to view all the persecution that they will endure. So I wanted to ask, have you ever felt that God has given you a new way to view your own circumstances in life? If you've dealt with a trial in life, if you've dealt with a difficulty, an illness, the loss of a loved one, anything like that, a financial difficulty, a divorce, abuse, do you feel that at some point God perhaps gave you a new lens with which to view that circumstance and why that happened to you?
Sometimes I feel like Job.
I bet you do. I know. I know.
Yeah.
And Job didn't get a good answer at the end, in a way, only that, to Jenny's point, that God is in control.
Control. I have a little card that sits on my nightstand that says God is in control. And I just have to look at that all the time.
Okay?
It's a reminder. That's a kind of a reminder, isn't it? That little card. Every once in a while you look at it and you say, yeah.
We need that kind of reminder. Sandy?
I have been through a divorce, and I still don't understand why.
Okay.
But I do believe that I met Bill as a result of being single, and we've been married almost 20 years now. And so God did bring that good into my life. However, I still don't understand why my first marriage did not work out. In fact, when Bill and I were planning our wedding, he wanted to go talk to his priest. He wanted us to talk to his priest. And the priest said, as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, is that I'm still married to my first husband. And he would not even consider marrying us unless I got an annulment. And I said, well, I will never get an annulment because I don't believe in it. And I have 3 children from that marriage, and I just could not have it annulled for that reason. And, you know, I look back and I know that God brought me through it. It was, I can't even tell you how difficult it was. I mean, it was the most difficult thing I've ever been through. But he brought me through it. And that's, you know, I see the good in God for that and for bringing Bill into my life. I mean, because, you know, I was even, you know, wasn't even easy financially as well as emotionally. It was not easy financially. It was very difficult.
What's an annulment?
An annulment in the Catholic Church, an annulment is a document that claims, that says that you were never married to that person.
Right.
You were never married.
You're a Catholic, you should know what an annulment is.
See, I didn't go that deeply when I was Catholic, I mean.
Okay, well, anyway, that's what it is. It's a document that claims, and you have to answer 100 questions. And so do other people, and to speak for you. My sister-in-law got an annulment from my brother because she wanted to remarry. And I had to answer 100 questions. And I thought, I am never gonna do
And
that.
it kind of feels like lying to somehow wipe the slate clean and act like you weren't married.
Yeah,
So-
that means that your children were born out of wedlock. I don't know how the Catholic Church can say that is right. I just don't know. And some people, it's an expensive thing. You pay for it too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. A lot.
So I want to pull us back in for a moment. One of the main underlying themes of this gospel is the idea that our response to others is not dictated by their behavior. That the way we respond to others should not be predicated or dictated by their behavior to us. How does that idea sit with you all?
It does not sit well with me,
Okay?
because the first time my husband raised his hand to hit me on the way to Easter church, I said it'll never happen again. And if it does, I'm out of here. When it came up the second time, I got a divorce. Now, at some point, you can forgive, and for years I had been praying to help with the emotional abuse, and in lots of ways, he did me a favor by backhanding me because I said nope, 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 nope. And up until then, I could take on the abuse as my fault because I didn't have dinner ready at the right time, or I didn't do this, or I didn't do that. But when he first hit me, nope, I had done nothing that gave him the right to do that.
Well-
So, at some point, you draw the line and you say,
Right.
enough is enough.
Well, one, Marcia, thank you for being so vulnerable and honest. That's very meaningful to me. And it brings up the point again that this gospel, and I'll say it to those online and I'll say it to you all here, this is not an excuse to perpetuate violence. This is not allowing violence, hatred, and so forth to go unchecked. That's not what Jesus is saying. The Sermon on the Plain is to disciples trying to mentally prepare them for what to expect because of their faith. It's not saying if someone throws a stone at you, go back every day and let them keep throwing a stone at you. It's not quite that simple and black and white. He is putting forth an ethic of love that does not choose to retaliate in kind. So that might be a better way of thinking about it. When one gives in love, when someone gives love, even when it won't be given back to them, then the giver can expect God to be,
Helpful.
the giver can expect God to be good to them because of that. And that's where it says your reward will be great, you'll be children of the Most High. He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. God is not human. And this picture that we get of God in Luke 6 is of a God who will forgive the abusive husband, who will forgive the terrorist, who will forgive the child molester. And this is not an easy thing to accept. And I'm not going to pretend it is. And that's why humans are not God, and we can't always see things as God does. Now, God is not saying that there won't be consequences to any of that. There are consequences to evil behavior, and I do believe that people will be held accountable to God for that behavior. But after that accountability comes forgiveness. If we believe what Jesus said hanging on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing, we also have to accept a God who ultimately will not hold people's sins against them. That doesn't mean that there are not human consequences, and you were right to do what you did, Marcia, and leave. But we're also talking about an ethic of love that will not damn someone to hell because of the earthly mistakes that they make. And I'm not, again, that's not easy to accept, and I'm not asking you to accept it without prayer and wrestling with God on that. But I do believe that the ethic of love that the New Testament, that the Gospels give us, is of God's response to the evil and the sin of humanity. And that is to forgive and to love without it being earned and deserved. And I have trouble with that too, sometimes. So I want to say that I have trouble with that too. But ultimately, I'm very thankful for that kind of God. Because I've made mistakes with my family. I've made mistakes as a child. I will make mistakes as an older adult. And I'd like to believe that God would have mercy on my human flawed limitations, no matter how bad.
So that means there cannot be a hell for eternal punishment.
I'm not saying that.
Oh.
I'm not saying that.
said-
I'm talking specifically about the gospel that says, be merciful just as your Father is merciful, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. I don't know if there is a hell for sinners. What I do know is that we are all sinners, and I know that Jesus asked the Father to forgive the very ones who crucified him and did not believe in him as the Messiah. So we have to wrestle with this dichotomy of people being held accountable to God for the sins that they do, but also a Savior. And think about that title a minute, if you will, with me. If we call Jesus a Savior, that implies that humanity needed to be saved of something, right? Saved of our own sin. And I think what happens from humanity's viewpoint is we want to rank sin. We want to say, okay, if you kill someone, oh, that's the worst. That's unforgivable. If you yell at someone, that's not quite as bad. If you steal, well, what did you steal? That's probably not even as bad. So I don't think that God has a hierarchy of what sin is worst and what is least offensive to God. I don't think that makes it any easier to accept the Sermon on the Plain. But I am thankful for the mercy and forgiveness of God. What I don't want to hear in the Sermon on the Plain is, if you have made a mistake, there is no forgiveness. You're done. One strike. You're out. So I am thankful that that is not the God that we hear about in the Gospels. Rachel.
For those who believe, I think that this is God's help to you emotionally to be able, I mean, yes, she did the right thing, and I agree. But I think that after it's all over, if you can forgive eventually, it will help you. The person who did the deed, it's their consequence. But if you can't forgive, then you're going to live with that, and they won't suffer, but you will, because you have to forgive them. But I think this is God's help to us, because I've had to forgive a lot of people. And the older I've gotten, and I've seen them die and so forth, I say to myself, okay, God's consequence, but he has helped me that I no longer live with that.
Right. let's conclude with that. That's an excellent thought, Rachel. Forgiveness heals the one giving the forgiveness
Yes,
most often.
yeah, and we need that.
Yes.
We need to feel that we have forgiven them, because they have to face the consequence. I don't. And, but I think it heals you inside. Because if you continue to hold on to it, then you suffer along with them. And you can't do that.
Amen. Thanks be to God. Thank you all for coming today. Have a blessed week.
I didn't know they made anything that they're selling.